They built 23 luxury cabins on my private island, and the HOA president laughed in my face when I told her to stop. So I let them finish. Then I walked into court and dropped the deed on the table. Before I tell you how it all went down, do me a favor if you care about folks standing up to bullies. Tap like, hit subscribe, and ring that bell so you don't miss the moment the so-called HOA Karen gets what's coming. I'm Ben Whitaker. I'm 68 years old, a retired Army engineer with knees that click in the cold and a stubborn streak I blame on my old man. Most mornings you'd find me on the shore of Fox Hollow Lake with a mug of black coffee, watching the fog lift off the water in slow curls. My wife Laura used to say the lake hummed if you listened long enough. It's quiet out here. Was quiet anyway. That morning the quiet started to growl. Diesel. You never forget that sound if you've worked around heavy machines. It came across the water like a warning, and when I shaded my eyes, I saw a convoy crawling over the stone causeway to my island. 7 acres of pine, granite, and family memories. Dead center of Fox Hollow, the spot where I scattered Laura's ashes under a silver maple during the first snow of '09. At first I figured it had to be a mistake. The Pinecrest Lake HOA takes themselves awful seriously, but nobody's that bold. Nobody drives a bulldozer onto another man's land in broad daylight. I slid my John boat off the shore, the motor coughing like an old dog, and churned across. The closer I got, the more I saw. Survey flags like bright little lies stuck all around my shoreline. A skid steer nosing at the moss, and a woman in a crisp white blouse talking into a radio like she was directing traffic at the airport. That was Denise Crowley, the HOA president. Folks around here call her the HOA Karen, not to her face, of course. She's got that way of smiling while she scolds you, like every word tastes like lemon juice. I pulled up to my dock, hopped off, and tied the boat. "Morning," I said, because I was raised to start civil. "You must be lost." She turned slow. "No, Mr. Whitaker," she said, tilting her head like she'd read my mail. "We're right where we're supposed to be. This island is designated common property under Pinecrest Lake covenants. We're improving it for our residents." Common property? I could feel my ears get hot. My grandfather put iron pins in this bedrock before your bylaws had diapers on. This is Whitaker land. Denise lifted a clipboard like it was a shield. "We have an updated plat on file." She waved a hand at the dozer. "Clear the shoreline. Leave the dock." For now, the dozer operator must have heard the last bit but only caught the first. The blade dropped with a chunk and pushed through the wild blueberry bushes like they were wet tissue. Then it kissed my dock leg, one of the cedar posts Laura and I sunk by hand the summer we rebuilt. The whole thing shuddered. The operator cut glance at Denise. She didn't blink. The blade tipped up, the post snapped, and my dock gave a long groan that I felt in my ribs before it broke in two and slid into the lake like a felled tree. Something in me went quiet. Not dead. Quiet. Like when you're about to do a delicate job and you need steady hands. "Turn that off," I said. The operator did, maybe because of my voice, maybe because he saw what he'd done. Denise didn't flinch. She kept smiling like a TV anchor. "Sir," she said, "as I was explaining, Pinecrest has authority. If you have paperwork, present it at the clubhouse and we'll consider your request." "My property isn't a request." I pointed at the silver maple. "My wife is under that tree." Her mouth flickered, and then the lemon smile came back. "Then I suppose she'll enjoy the new views." "Have a lovely day," she pivoted, radioed, and the saws started singing. I don't remember getting back in the boat. I remember my hands on the tiller, white-knuckled. I remember standing in my kitchen with the cabinet doors open, pulling down binders and file boxes Laura had labeled in her tidy hand. Taxes, insurance, Pinecrest. Don't lose old county deeds. I flipped and flipped and flipped some more until papers fanned out across the table and floor like a snowdrift. I found the tax bills and the insurance endorsements and the note from the bank. I found a 1957 survey sketch I'd seen 100 times. Whitaker parcel drawn like a shoe with a little island-shaped heel. But the original deed, the certified copy, it wasn't there. Laura had never missed something like that. She had a system that could have run NASA. I stood there in the wreck of my paper storm and listened to the distant buzz of saws carrying over the water. The certified letter hit my mailbox the next morning. White envelope, green strip, the kind that puts your stomach in your shoes. Pinecrest Lake Homeowners Association, Compliance Division. It was an invoice. Encroachment fee, unauthorized firing, and seating within common area shoreline. Due upon receipt. There was a photo attached, my fire ring, my lawn chairs, my boot tracks. I marched down to the clubhouse like I was late for a fight I didn't start. The air smelled like coffee and new carpet. People I'd known 20 years stared at their shoes. Denise sat at a long table with two board members and a young man in a cheap suit who looked like he'd learned how to say, "We're not liable," before he learned to shave. I laid my 1957 survey sketch on the table. Family parcel since 55, I said. You lost? Or just proud? Denise tapped the paper with one red nail like she was checking it for dust. This is a draft, she said. No stamp, no recording number. Our records show a correction in 1994 that vacated a private claim to the island and returned it to the Pinecrest Common. We're developing amenities. It will be lovely vacated. By who? By the association. You're a member? I never signed off on that. You don't need to understand the details, the young attorney piped up. If you wish to contest, hire counsel. Meanwhile, please refrain from interfering with our contractors. Any further disturbance will be documented. He smiled without his eyes. Have a blessed day. Folks say anger is hot. Mine went cold. I went home and cleared my workbench. I laid out a ruler, a magnifier, the old survey sketch, and a map Laura kept framed on the hallway wall because she said it made our house feel like a cabin in Maine. I measured. The old sketch had bearings and distances you could trust if you knew how to read men who worked with steel tapes and compasses. North 42 degrees east, 137 feet to 3/4-inch iron set in bedrock. I knew that iron. I'd tripped over it as a kid when we fished off the point. The signature box on the sketch was blank. That hurt. But the lines were true. At dusk, a county truck rolled to my drive. An inspector stepped out. Ray Nolan, graying mustache, easy gait. We got a complaint of unpermitted shoreline alterations, he said, glancing down at a form. Behind him, Denise's SUV pulled in, and out climbed the young attorney along with two men in polos that said security across the back. Denise wore sunglasses like it was still noon. This gentleman has been interfering with HOA improvements, she said, her voice sweet enough to rot a tooth. We'd like the county to document everything. Ray introduced himself, firm handshake. He walked the path with me. We reached the shore and he took in the fresh tire tracks and the stubs of cedar where my dock had been. He whistled through his teeth. This your dock? Was. Got permits? I put it in before the county started playing hall monitor with every nail, Ray. It was legal then. Not that it matters. They knocked it over. Ray took pictures. Denise trotted after us, heels biting into the dirt, chirping about community benefit. Ray flipped through the paperwork the attorney handed him, a glossy, updated plat. He shrugged. Mr. Whitaker, some of this is a civil matter. If you got a deed, bring it down to the county office. We can't referee a turf war. That night, they fenced off the causeway with 10-foot chain link and a padlock big enough to anchor a ship. Private access only, the sign shouted. The lake went black, except for the floodlights they pointed straight at my island like a prison yard. Saws started again, and nail guns popped like corn. I sat in a lawn chair with a flashlight and an old transistor radio that only got classic country and the weather. I drank my coffee strong at midnight and stronger at 3 a.m. I wrote to-do lists on the backs of envelopes. Every roadblock, every workaround. My wife used to say, when you can't push through, go around. She'd also say, don't let mean people turn you mean. I tried. Lord, I tried. The next week was a blur of small humiliations. A compliance officer with a badge that looked ordered off the internet taped another warning to my front door while I was at the hardware store. I got an email that said I'd been fined $200 for verbal harassment at an official meeting. A security SUV crawled up and down my street twice a day, very slow, like they were counting rocks. My neighbors, good folks, started ducking into garages when they saw me. They didn't want trouble. I get it. Most people don't sign up for a war over property lines. Most people just want their grass cut and a peaceful walk after supper. One afternoon, I was flipping through a folder marked Laura. Personal, because when you're desperate, you look everywhere. I found an old Polaroid of Laura sitting on the island dock with a fishing rod in her hand and a blue bandana on her head. On the back, she'd written, "Ben, pins don't lie. Ask Walt." My heart did a little hiccup. Walt Mercer. He'd been the county surveyor back in the day, the sort of man who trusted iron more than ink. I hadn't seen him since Laura's service. I went digging in the phone book like it was 1987, and I found a Mercer W still there. I called. He picked up on the second ring with a voice like gravel. "Walt, it's Ben Whitaker." He made a noise that might have been a hello. When I explained, he didn't act surprised. "People think paper beats rock," he said. "They forget the rock was there first." He told me to bring coffee, black, no sugar. I did. He slid a battered logbook across his kitchen table. It smelled like old wood and gun oil. "Iron pins," he said, tapping a page with a greased dark finger. 3/4 inch, 5 feet into bedrock at the corner points. You could wrap that island in chain link and call it Mars, and those pins would still be there. He gave me coordinates. He gave me bearings. He gave me the sort of look a man gives another when he's handing over a rope and trusting him not to hang himself. I hired a private firm, Sierra Boundary Group, run by a younger vet named Caleb Nguyen, who looked like he could lift a truck. He showed up with a GPS rig and a respectful silence that made me like him in a hurry. They spent 2 days climbing around the island, cussing at brambles and chipping moss off granite, until I heard Caleb shout the kind of joyful word you don't say in church. They found Walt's iron pins, exactly where his book said they'd be. They marked each one with orange flagging and took readings until their machines quit arguing. Caleb shook my hand when he left. "We'll have the certified survey ready by Friday," he said. "You're not crazy, Mr. Whitaker." The envelope arrived on a Tuesday, thick and heavy with promise. I laid the survey out on my table like a general laying out a battle map. The lines snapped tight. The island was inside my parcel like a jewel in a setting. The 23 cabin footprints, because that's what they'd hammered together while I was chasing paper, were plotted in red. Every one of them sat on Whitaker land. I took pictures for my own sanity, and then I drove to the courthouse with my jaw clenched and my breath slow like I was cutting glass. In the civil window, I asked for the quiet title forms. The clerk, a young woman with green glasses, slid them over without looking up. "Fill these out," she said, "and if you want it to move faster, get it notarized today." Faster. Lord, I filled the forms with my stiff old hands. Legal description, chain of title as best as I could reconstruct, the survey and affidavit from Walt that he signed with a hand that shook but letters that stood up straight. I paid what I had to pay, which was more than I wanted, but less than I feared, and I asked for a hearing. The clerk told me to sit tight. I don't sit tight well, but I did. Back home, Pinecrest cranked up the pressure. 2 men in HOA jackets came to my door and told me if I set foot on common areas, I'd be trespassing. One of them filmed me on a phone while I stood in my own yard. "Smile," he said. I didn't. A security car parked across the street for an hour, then left, then came back after supper. They wanted me rattled. It was working around the edges. Then the letter came from my insurance company. Policy canceled in 30 days. Increase in risk, it said, which is a fancy way of saying you're trouble and we don't like trouble. Without insurance, the bank could call my note. The noose pulled one notch tighter. My daughter Emily called that night. She lives 2 hours away with her husband, a steady guy who fixes HVAC for a living. She asked me if I was eating, which sounded like her mother. She asked me if I wanted them to come stay a few days, which sounded like Emily. I told her no. I needed quiet and a plan. She told me to promise I wouldn't do anything dumb. I told her I'd do something smart and hoped I wasn't lying. 2 days later, Pinecrest held a ribbon cutting on Whitaker Island. They'd named it that on the flyers like a sick joke, and invited the community to tour the premium rental cabins available by lottery this summer. I stood on my dead grass at the edge of the shore like a ghost, watching from a distance because the chain link still blocked the causeway. I could hear the speeches. I could hear Denise's voice rising like a kettle. I could see kids chasing each other on brand new boardwalks that cut across land where Laura and I had held hands and skipped stones. I wanted to scream. I didn't. I went inside and opened Laura's cedar chest, the one she'd asked me to keep because it smelled like Christmas. Under a stack of blankets and an old sweater of mine she used to steal when she was cold, I found a manila envelope with a note in Laura's hand. For when the paper gets slippery. Inside were notary copies of everything I had just hauled to the courthouse, and one more, a certified copy of a deed transfer from my grandfather to my father that I had never seen, recorded right and proper in blue ink back when clerks still used fountain pens. Laura had tucked it away like a mother tucking a kid in for a storm. I sat right there on the floor and cried like I hadn't since the day we planted the silver maple. When my hearing day came, Pinecrest didn't show. Maybe they thought I was bluffing. Maybe they figured they owned the room by habit and could stroll in whenever, and the judge would pat them on the head. Judge Delgado didn't pat anybody. She had the kind of eyes that made you answer the questions she actually asked, not the one you wished she'd asked. She studied my survey like it was a crossword. She asked me about the chain of title. I answered. I showed Walt's affidavit. I showed Laura's blue ink deed. She nodded once. Default judgment in favor of plaintiff, she said, and her pen scratched across the order. Quiet title granted, Whitaker the sole legal owner of the island, and all improvements thereon. I stood there feeling like a man who'd been holding his breath underwater for 2 minutes and finally broke the surface. Then I remembered, a court order is paper. Those cabins were lumber and nails, and a whole lot of nerve. Paper can blow away unless you use it right. I took a copy of the order to the county's environmental office. There's nothing HOAs fear more than someone who knows how to read regulations out loud. The gentleman at the counter listened to me, called a colleague, and then called another. They rolled trucks the next morning, 2 from environmental, 1 from septic, and another from building code. They crossed the causeway with clipboards like bayonets and went door to door on those brand new cabins. I watched from the water in my John boat, motor off, drifting like a patient gator. One by one, they slapped orange stickers on the glass. Stop work, do not occupy, because if you build 23 structures in a hurry without a straight title, it's pretty hard to keep your paperwork as clean as your brochures. Pinecrest went red-faced. Denise called an emergency town hall that night and sent out a robocall that sounded like she was barking through clenched teeth. We will not be intimidated, she said. We will pursue legal remedies against Mr. Whitaker for tortious interference. I put on my old field jacket because it still fits when nothing else does, and walked into the clubhouse while folks were still taking chairs. There were more people than I'd seen at a meeting in 20 years. Anger fills a room fast when it comes home to roost. I took the aisle slow. The security guys hovered. Denise glared like a lighthouse. I set the court order on the folding table at the front and let it land with a hard thud that felt honest. That's fake, she said, right off, loud enough to wake the dead. A door opened at the back. In walked Owen Price, the county records clerk, a young man who still says ma'am and sir and means it. He carried a folder like a football. It's not fake, he said into the mic, voice steady. It's recorded as of this morning. He held up the stamped copy like a sheriff showing a warrant. The room didn't explode so much as turn. I watched people I'd known for years pivot from glaring at me to staring at Denise and her board like they just found out their babysitter had been stealing silver from the china hutch. You used our reserves for this? A woman in a cardigan asked, voice shaking. You promised it was all clear. Denise started to talk, but deputies walked in, county, not Pinecrest, and served papers like Santa with warrants. Cease and desist orders, code violations, a notice of a hearing about misuse of association funds. The young attorney went white. One of the board members asked for a minute and never came back. Another pulled out her phone and started typing like her life depended on it. I didn't gloat. I didn't crow. I'm too old for chest thumping. I said my piece into the mic, voice simple. I didn't start this, but I'm finishing it. I picked up my copy of the order, nodded to Owen, and walked out with the room humming like a beehive disturbed. The days that followed felt like watching a slow-motion collapse. The board resigned, one by one. A committee formed to figure out where the money had gone. An auditor found numbers that didn't add up in a way that makes lawyers lick their chops. The developer who had been attached to Pinecrest Grand Plan vanished like a raccoon when the porch light comes on. P.O. box closed, phone disconnected, website down to a sad under-maintenance page. The cabin sat there like a row of guilty faces, windows taped with orange that flapped when the breeze came up. Sometimes winning tastes like ash. I stood at my kitchen sink, looking at those cabins through the trees, and I felt tired in my bones. What the heck was I going to do with 23 half-legal cabins on my island? I could have burned it all to the ground in my head a dozen times, but that's not who Laura married. I'm an engineer. Problems are puzzles. You solve them piece by piece. I called Caleb at Sierra Boundary. I called Ray at the county. I called a septic guy who knows his business and doesn't cheat on the clay. I pulled permits the right way. I hired 2 crews to fix what was sloppy, add what was missing, and tear out what was illegal. It took all spring. It cost more than I liked. I ate peanut butter and crackers and drank cheap coffee. I slept like a log because honest work and a clean conscience will do that to you. When the county signed off, I listed the cabins individually, not as rentals but as simple vacation places. Good roofs, legal wells, septic like the Lord intended, with a clause in every closing that carved out a public right-of-way to the old fishing rock because I still believe the lake belongs to folks who love it. I priced fair and a hair low because greed is what got us here. The offers came fast. Every time a cabin sold, I took the check to the bank and watched the numbers move like a slow tide. I paid off what needed paying. I rebuilt what needed rebuilding on my own shore. Then I did something nobody expected, including me. I wrote a big check to a veterans housing trust in Laura's name. I didn't blow a trumpet. I didn't tell the paper. I just sent it with a letter that said, "For folks who need a steady roof and a quiet room." Laura had a way of turning my stubborn into something useful. I could hear her laugh when I sealed the envelope. Soft, proud, the sound that made the worst days bearable. Word travels faster than a speedboat on a calm morning. One by one, neighbors came by, not with lawsuits, but with casseroles and apologies. A fellow I barely knew, Tom Alvarez, rolled up with a pickup full of lumber and a nervous smile. "You ready to build a dock that'll outlast us?" he asked. I brought my boys. We set to work like we were 20 years younger. We sank new posts, deeper than before. We laid deck boards straight and true. The lake mirrored the sky. People brought lemonade and stories. Someone put on a radio and turned it down low to oldies. When we set the last board, everybody clapped like we'd won a game we didn't know we were playing. Tom wiped his hands on his jeans and looked at the water. "I hated watching what they did to you," he said. "I was scared to pick a side." "I get it," I said. "Fear's a heavy coat, hard to take off by yourself." He nodded and didn't argue. The county came out and removed the chain link. They loaded it onto a flatbed and drove it away like a bad dream. The town council renamed the little gravel road that leads to the causeway, Whitaker Point, which embarrassed me some, but I can't lie, it warmed the old ticker too. The silver maple threw a bigger shadow that summer, like it was stretching after a long nap. I'd sit under it in the early morning with my coffee and think about how long a man has to be stubborn to make it count in the right direction. The cabins across the cove lit up at night, not with floodlights but with soft lamps and the sort of glow that means people are telling stories and playing cards and washing dishes while they talk. From my chair, I could hear laughter carry sometimes, the old clean kind. Kids jumped off the new docks, whooped like banshees. Dogs barked at nothing and meant it. The lake took it all in and gave it back the way lakes do. Folks say water forgets. I think it remembers. It just doesn't hold grudges. Every now and then I get a look at Denise. She didn't go to jail or anything dramatic like TV, far as I know. The auditors did their work. The county did theirs. Pinecrest held elections and found a board made mostly of people who know how to say please and thank you. Denise moved out 2 streets over, sold her place, and left before the leaves turned. Someone said she took a job 3 counties away. Someone else said she's on a beach somewhere telling people how badly she was treated. I don't care. Life has a way of sorting loud folks who don't listen. I tell you all this because people think you lose. And then, boom, you win, credits roll. That's not how it felt. It felt like 1,000 little choices, most of them humbling, all of them stubborn. It felt like listening more than I talked, and talking when it was time, and letting paper be heavy when it needed to be heavy. It felt like remembering that iron pins in rock don't lie even when people do. It felt like looking fear in the eye and asking it to show me a permit. I wish Laura had been here to see the kids running down the causeway with towels dragging behind them like capes. She would have laughed at Tom trying to teach his boys to tie a proper cleat hitch. She would have stood on the new dock and said, "Ben, you see? The right fight pays off. I think she knows. Call me soft. I don't mind. Getting old, you stop apologizing for what keeps you tender." I thought that was the end. I slept through the night for the first time in months. I made pancakes on a Tuesday. I oiled the hinges on the boathouse door so they stopped complaining. Then right when the leaves started turning in the first cool week of September, a white envelope showed up in my mailbox. Certified, green strip. My stomach did that old boot heel drop. I signed for it, took it inside, and sat at the kitchen table where I'd once spread maps and hoped like a picnic. On the return address, there was a name I hadn't heard in years, not since a family reunion with too much potato salad and one too many arguments about who got Grandpa's tackle box. I cracked the seal with a butter knife and slid out the papers. I read the first line and felt the room tilt. Just a hair, the way it does when something you thought was settled rumbles back to life. If you want to hear what was in that letter and how it turned everything sideways all over again, stick around. Hit like, make sure you're subscribed, and ring that bell so you don't miss what came next, because I promise you, this story wasn't done with me just yet.